Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles for a detailed analysis. Stay with me for the next 1 hour 10 minutes and we will cover all these articles as comprehensively as possible so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking this initiative, do support us through your likes and comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Now before we start the discussion, we have a couple of very important announcements. To help the 2025 aspirants, we are launching the new batches for our online classroom program. We have the Arambh English batch in bilingual medium and we have the Triumph English batch which is all set to start very soon. And the best part is you can enroll for these programs by using the offer that Unacademy is providing. Right now the courses are available at just around 25,000 rupees and it's a limited offer which is going to end by tomorrow. So if interested, do contact the number provided in the description below. And also please note, if there are any aspirants who are preparing for the upcoming prelims, we are conducting the 4th and final mock test tomorrow on the 9th of June. So this is a great opportunity for you to attempt a full-length question paper both for GS and CSAT, and you'll also get an all India ranking, plus we are going to discuss and analyze the full-length mock test paper. So do register for the test by using the link provided in the video description. And also I see that many of you have been asking for the PDFs of our sessions. We are sharing all the PDFs on our Telegram channel. So do join the Telegram channel so that you can get all the PDFs that we are using in our YouTube sessions. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this important article from page number 8. This column is related to Indian polity. The writer, Mr. Arun Kumar, is one of India's leading economists, and he talks about center-state financial relations in the era of coalition government. In the recent Lok Sabha results, as you have seen, there has been no majority for any single party. So again, the BJP-led NDA is all set to form a coalition government which will be sworn in by tomorrow. So with the return of the coalition era, the writer is talking about the center-state relations, the issue of federalism. How in the past, for example, in the last decade or so, there were complaints from several states that the center was often discriminating against them. There have been issues with regard to devolution of funds, resources from the center to the states and amongst the states as well. So the writer is of the viewpoint that a coalition government is extremely good for federalism and center-state relations. So that is the writer's viewpoint. The writer says in a coalition era where regional parties are going to play a big role, it is always beneficial for the states when it comes to allocation of resources and distribution of financial resources. So the writer says that the return of the coalition era is going to be very good for regional development. It's going to be good for federalism and center-state relations in general. So let's look at both sides of the argument. Let's not get limited by what the writer is talking about, but let's expand our horizons by looking at this topic in complete detail. So following the recent election results, there has been intense speculation about what will be the nature of the government, whether it will affect decision making, whether it will affect resource allocation from the center to states, etc. See, when it comes to this particular issue, it is of course a debatable, controversial issue, but there are both sides to the story. In certain areas, in certain contexts, coalition governments have done very well, whereas in the other context, coalition governments have often been hit by indecisiveness. They have been dragged on multiple fronts by various coalition partners, leading to indecisiveness and also leading to a compromise on federal principles and constitutional principles. So the writer says that especially opposition-ruled states in the previous term of the Modi government had a lot of complaints against the center. For example, if you look at West Bengal or Karnataka or Tamil Nadu or even Kerala, many of these opposition-ruled states, they have often complained that the center often gives them a stepmotherly treatment. meaning when it comes to allocation of funds, the center often allegedly discriminates against opposition ruled states. Now this has happened not just under the Modi government at the center, it has happened previously as well. Under every central government, there have been these allegations, these concerns that opposition ruled states are often discriminated and targeted. While the center, which is responsible for national development, right, it of course drives the agenda, sets the priorities for the entire nation. The center is expected on its part to be as fair as possible when it comes to resource allocation to all the states. But certain states have these complaints, especially the larger states which generate more revenue. When it comes to devolution of funds, the much richer states, the larger states which contribute more tax revenue, have often complained that a large part of the allocation is given away to the poor states which are not contributing enough to the revenue. And this has led to friction between the states as well, along with the existing friction between center and states. So if you look at, let's say, the issues raised by Kerala, Kerala has even approached the Supreme Court alleging that the center is not providing adequate resources. If you look at Karnataka, which is ruled by the Congress, it has raised complaints and it has raised issues with regard to disaster relief, and it has blamed the center for not providing adequate funds for drought relief and for other welfare programs. West Bengal and Tamil Nadu also have had similar complaints, and some have even approached the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has refused to step into this domain. It has refused to directly interfere between center and states. But however, these issues that we have seen in the recent years, it brings up this question of center-state relations, especially the financial relations, and whether or not coalition government can be good for center-state financial relations. That is the question being addressed by this article. Now, if you look at the Indian states, they have a lot of diversity between them. Now, when it comes to national development, when it comes to socio-economic welfare, you can't treat all the states on the same level. A state like Uttar Pradesh or Bihar might have different developmental issues. A state like Maharashtra or Gujarat, they might have different priorities and concerns. Or smaller states, let's say in the northeast or the border states of India, they might have very different challenges and requirements. So the writer says that the center should not look at all the states equally, right, as far as at least resource allocation comes. The writer is very clear that there has to be a distinction depending on the diversity found in different states, the need for development, the challenges, the concerns in different states. Allocation has to be done accordingly. There is no doubt regarding that. So the writer dismisses the argument of certain states that there should be equitable approach by the center. That is never possible when you have such a huge diversity amongst the states. But however, there should be a proportionate allocation, a fair allocation. That is what the writer is pointing out. You can't have equitable allocation. That is not feasible given the diversity among the states and the different developmental needs of different states. Of course, there will be varying allocation, but this has to be proportionate. The allocation of resources by the center has to be proportionate and fair. It should respect the spirit of federalism, which is part of the basic structure of the constitution as well. It shouldn't appear as if the center is discriminating only against opposition ruled states. So that is what the writer is bringing up, and he says that coalition era is going to be much better in this regard, because since there won't be a single party dominating at the center, the coalition partners will pull the central government in different directions, which might be good as well, because it might provide more attention for center-state financial relations and provide for more fair and proportionate allocations to different states. Now, if you look at the various conflicts that come up when it comes to center-state relations and also interstate relations, there are some different issues on which these conflicts come up. For example, if you look at welfare issues like education, healthcare, or even poverty, elevation, social services, etc. In these sectors, right, in each state, the requirements, the demands, concerns are going to be different. For example, in Tamil Nadu, the status of health and education would be different. In Uttar Pradesh, the requirement with regard to health and education would be different. So this is where states require a little more freedom, a little more flexibility, they would require adequate resource allocation so that they can do justice to the demands and the requirements of the people of that state. So in this regard, every state requires a certain flexibility, and that is what the writer is calling for. When it comes to subjects like education, health, social services, poverty alleviation programs, the writer is calling for more flexibility to be given to the states. Let the states determine whether the allocation of funds are enough. Let the center not play the role, and instead ensure that the states play a direct role in these areas. But there would be certain issues where interstate collaboration would be required. For example, infrastructure development or water sharing. For example, if you look at interstate rivers or even the projects on these interstate rivers, be it a dam project, hydroelectric project, or even the infrastructure like road, railway connectivity, etc. This would require interstate coordination. It would require multiple states to come together. So this is one area where conflicts might come up between different states. Then finally, you have few subjects like defense, communication, security, or even currency management, the overall monetary management of the economy, right? This is where a degree of centralization is necessary to bring more efficiency and to ensure optimal allocation of resources. So this is where center has to play a bigger role. So in areas like defense, communication, security, monetary management, the center has to play a defining role, a dominating role. There should be greater centralization. But when it comes to, let's say, welfare subjects like education, health, state should have a higher degree of control. And when it comes to interstate issues like infrastructure, water sharing, etc., there is a need for interstate coordination which the center should achieve by working with both the states. So these are the areas of conflict where these challenges come up between center and states or amongst the states. But the writer is saying that by dividing the issues into these three segments, the center can play a positive role. It can aid the states, assist the states accordingly. Because according to the writer, the center is just a notion which exists in the constitution. Center is not a reality according to the writer. Because what really exists on the ground are the states. Eventually, whatever program the center implements, right, whatever project the center takes up, it is in some state or the other. So the writer is saying that state governments are real, local authorities are real, center is just notional, created by the constitution. So writer's viewpoint is that the center should play this positive role where it is nudging all the states, allocating resources accordingly, proportionately, in a fair manner, without any discrimination, irrespective of whether a state is opposition ruled state. Now, if you look at financial relations between center and states, we have few constitutional provisions that define the center-state financial relations. Under Part 12 of the Indian Constitution, from Article 268 to Article 280, there are several important provisions related to taxation, devolution of funds, allocation of resources, etc. So these are the constitutional provisions that define the center-state financial relations. Now, to run any welfare program, to take up any project, of course, to incur that expenditure, resources are necessary. So center and states have different ways of raising these resources. Center and states, according to the Indian Constitution, they can levy certain taxes, collect the taxes, and the center has a responsibility to distribute certain taxes as well to the states. Now, for example, if you look at income tax, customs duty, or corporation tax, etc., these are levied, collected by the center. Then you have GST, the indirect regime that we have, which is collected by both center and states, but eventually the center has to distribute and reallocate these resources to the states and amongst the states as well. There are few provisions for the states as well to levy local taxes, which they levy, collect and keep for themselves. So in the constitution, there are different types of taxes, but the center has a greater responsibility here as it gets a bigger share of the tax resources. States have very limited financial viability in that regard. The constitution itself in a way has a bias, has a favor towards the center, where the center is allowed to play a greater dominating role when it comes to tax collection and devolution of the funds and resources. But the writer is worried here that the center often misuses this authority. The center often favors certain states where the same party would be in power, and in many cases opposition ruled states have been discriminated. This is an allegation made by the writer, not just under the current or the previous governments, but historically in the past as well. In general, there has been a trend where the central government has often shown a favorable bias towards those states which are ruled by the same party, and it has also shown a sense of discrimination when it comes to opposition ruled states. So in the constitution, we have a constitutional body, the Finance Commission, established under Article 280 to determine the devolution of funds. Finance Commission, which is established by the centre, appointed by the President of India, it is given a mandate, it is given a terms of reference, and it's supposed to come out with a formula for both vertical devolution and horizontal devolution of funds. Vertical devolution would be devolution of funds from the centre to the states. What would be the percentage of devolution? The percentage of resources that will be distributed to the states from the central pool of taxes that have been collected. Horizontal devolution would be what would be the percentage of distribution amongst the states. So on both these questions, there have been a lot of disputes and issues between the centre and states, and also amongst the states. See, what happens is that usually the Finance Commission, which is appointed by the centre at the end of the day, inherently ends up favouring the central government, because the centre is the one which will not just appoint the Finance Commission, right, but will also set the mandate, the terms of reference. So historically, there has been this allegation that the Finance Commissions often have a bias towards the centre, and they end up allocating more to the centre and leave very little behind for the state governments. But when it comes to the horizontal distribution, right, there are a lot of complaints from the larger states, the richer states, which are contributing more to tax revenue. You might have heard about this argument where states like Tamil Nadu or even Karnataka, sometimes even Maharashtra, which are contributing more significantly to our tax collection, right? Their argument is that higher allocation is going to the poorer states, let's say Uttar Pradesh or Bihar or Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh or other smaller states, while they are contributing very little for tax revenue. Now the writer says this is a flawed argument of the larger states, because if you look at the actual picture on the ground, larger states actually benefit from the poorer states in the country, because the poorer states are offering a market which creates an opportunity for the larger states. Plus the cheap labor in the larger industrialized states is coming largely from the poorer states through migration. And don't forget that the migration of people, workers, is creating a massive economic opportunity in the larger states as well through increased economic activity, increased tax collection. So directly, indirectly, there are a lot of benefits that the rich states are accruing to themselves because of the contribution of the poorer states as well. So writer does not buy the argument of the rich states and the larger states, which have this complaint that they are contributing more but getting less in return, because part of the devolution goes, there is a higher allocation in general to the poorer states to provide for their welfare. Now this argument is flawed according to the writer, because poorer states are in a way aiding the richer states directly or indirectly. But this issue between the states when it comes to allocation of funds has become a major political debate in the country, and it could even threaten the very foundation of federalism in the country. So the writer here points out that under a coalition government at the center, this issue could be better handled, right? Since there are no regional parties which will play a defining role at the central government, they could play a bigger role in ensuring that the distribution is fair enough, but at the same time ensuring that such divisive issues are handled in a more mature manner. Without dominating over any of the states, the center can convince the richer states that higher allocation of funds to the poorer states is necessary for overall national development. Directly, indirectly, it's benefiting the larger states eventually. So this argument between the rich and poor states is not valid, and under a coalition government we might see a better handling of the issue according to the writer. Then if you look at center's allocation, apart from the recommendations of the Financial Commission, right, the Finance Commission gives out a recommendation. Right now the devolution is around 41% from center to states. So this is what the center provides to the states, and it's distributed amongst the states as per the formula designed by the Finance Commission. Other than the Finance Commission devolution, the center spends its own money in various state governments or in various states. So the center would be implementing a number of welfare schemes or taking up several developmental projects, developmental works. Eventually, where does the investment happen? It will happen in some state or the other, right? Because as the writer says, center is notional. The center only exists in the constitution, right? But the states are the ones which are real, which exist on the ground. So whatever projects the center funds or whatever scheme the government takes up at the center, eventually it is implemented in some state. So states are the ones which would benefit. So this is also a type of a transfer. Every central scheme, central project, it is a type of a transfer. And here states compete. They try to ensure that there are more projects taken up in their respective states. So in this case, we have seen a trend where the ruling party at the center often tends to favor certain states where the same party would be in power. Right? Not just a recent phenomena, but even in the past decades, we have seen this happen where the ruling party at the center tends to favor certain states. Certain leaders will prefer their own states over others and provide more projects and new investments which will benefit certain states to the disadvantage of the others. So this is one concern which has remained when a single party has remained at power. Now the writer says with a coalition government this may not happen. Coalition partners will pull the center in different directions and ensure that there is a better distribution of these funds, a better allocation of these projects to various states equitably that will provide for overall national development. So writer is arguing that coalition era is good in that regard because it will end the dominance of a single party, right? It's not just few states which will be favored. Many other states will also benefit because there would be better distribution of these central funds, central schemes and central projects. So right now, the 16th Finance Commission has already begun its work. It has been constituted. So states are eagerly looking forward to its recommendation. So as of now, the devolution is set at around 41%. The vertical devolution from center to states is at 41%. So the writer is arguing here to increase this percentage of allocation. The writer is recommending that the 16th Finance Commission should protect federalism, should protect the spirit of cooperative federalism between center and states and among the states by ensuring that there is a greater allocation and an even-handed treatment of all the states. As much as possible, there should be proportionate allocation and fair treatment of all the states with increased transfer of funds, with greater autonomy being given to the states and ensuring that states are not held, essentially they are not held hostage to the mercy of the central government. And also the writer is calling upon the center so that the divide and the differences between the rich and poor states can be handled in a better way and can be resolved as well through better allocation of these resources. So in that regard, the writer is very confident that a coalition government is much better as far as federalism and center-state financial relations are concerned. But of course, this may not always be the case. Usually what happens under a coalition government is that some of the few partners which are more influential within the center, they will end up taking away a big share of the resources, leaving behind the other states. In the current context, I am sure you would know that Bihar and Andhra Pradesh, they stand to benefit immensely, right? And if the funds are largely allocated, if there is a greater devolution only towards these states because of coalition politics, it could leave behind the other states, resulting in differences amongst the states as well and friction between center and states as well. So only time will tell as to how things will transpire, but coalition governments honestly can be a double-edged sword. If managed well, it can work for national development, it can work for all the concerned stakeholders, but if not, if it is only pulled in different directions by the coalition partners, it may end up derailing the economic reforms, it might end up derailing the decision-making capabilities of the center as well, which might have adverse consequences with regard to allocation of financial resources as well. So based on this, let's take up a question. Let's see what kind of question can be asked here. Utilization of the country's resources needs to be decided jointly by the center and the states. Critically examine. Now what we can do is we can take some help from this article and also add in our own points to build a good answer for this given question. So in the introduction, you can talk about center-state financial relations, because that is what the question is focused upon. You can give a brief introduction about the nature of center-state financial relations, maybe mention some provisions of the Constitution from Article 268 to 280, role of the Finance Commission, in brief, in a small paragraph, explain what is the general nature that we see in India when it comes to distribution of financial resources from the center to the states. Then in the body, you can highlight that this is an integral feature of federalism. We will have a strong federal setup as long as there is equitable and proportionate distribution of resources between center and states and also amongst the states. So when you set this argument, then you can talk about the concerns that exist. You can list out some of the concerns where it appears that the most dominant political party will corner the resources and allocate more resources only to certain states where they are in power. Maybe you can provide certain examples without naming any party. You don't have to show any kind of political bias. Without mentioning any party or any coalition government, you can just illustrate how there have been instances where certain states appear to have been favored when compared to the opposition ruled states. You can also bring up the debate between the rich and the poor states. How certain larger states have complained that they are contributing more revenue but getting less in return, whereas more allocation is being given to the poorer states. And then you can start dismissing these arguments with data and with evidence. You can point out that this argument of the rich larger states is not valid, because when it comes to national development, the rich states are not just making a charitable contribution here, because the poor states in return contribute to the growth of the richer and larger states as well. There are many direct benefits. The center has an obligation to provide greater development and welfare in the poorer states and the backward states. So you can dismiss and set aside this argument while calling for protection of federalism and while calling for proportionate and fair allocation of resources. You can point out how it's important in a federal setup for the center and states to work together jointly when it comes to distribution of resources and management of the resources in the country. So set your answer on this particular tone, and you can end your answer with a way forward. Provide a conclusion, maybe provide suggestions regarding what the Finance Commission can do. You can suggest that the current percentage of allocation, which is set at 41%, may not be adequate. The Finance Commission, the 16th Finance Commission, can consider increasing the allocation, the devolution of funds to the states. Or Finance Commission can come out with a better formula to decide the horizontal devolution of funds amongst the states. So maybe provide certain suggestions, or for example, how interstate coordination achieved by the center can help in reaching a middle ground, and how the center can drive greater coordination between the states through a more involved approach, through a more proactive, friendlier approach, instead of dominating over opposition ruled states. So provide certain suggestions in your way forward, and that should be more than sufficient for completing this answer. Now let's look at another important column on the same page that is related to environment and ecology. This article is related to the proposed Global Plastics Treaty. Now this is a topic that I have covered in complete detail in the month of April. In the month of April, the topic was in news repeatedly. We have held a number of discussions on the proposed Global Plastics Treaty. So right now I'll not go into the entire background. You can go back and watch some of those sessions, but I'll mainly focus on the argument being made by the writers here. They are talking about the informal industry which manages plastic waste, and the welfare and rights of informal workers who play a critical role in plastic waste management. So let's take a look at this topic. It's a very interesting topic as well. As you know, plastic waste happens to be toxic, hazardous, and extremely difficult to deal with. If you look at OECD's report, the Global Plastic Outlook Report, please make a note of this. This could even be asked as a prelims question. Who publishes the Global Plastic Outlook Report? It's published by OECD. According to this report, as of 2019, 353 million tons of plastic waste was produced around the world. Now this is more than double the plastic waste that was produced 2 decades ago. If you look at the data, let's say from around 2000, right? The total amount of plastic waste generated in the world was less than half of that. So in just 2 decades, we have more than doubled the plastic waste we are producing. And according to OECD projections, this is going to increase more than 3 times by 2050-2060. That is, in the next 30 years, in the next 3 to 4 decades, the plastic waste being produced in the world is going to triple from the current levels. So let this sink in, let the magnitude, the significance of this data, this information just sink in, so that you can realize the gravity of the problem that we are dealing with. And the worst part is that we have not been successful. We have not been very successful in establishing a circular economy as far as plastic waste is concerned. In a circular economy, you can promote recycle, reuse, and repurpose. You can ensure that the material is handled in a more scientific manner, the waste is collected scientifically, it is processed in a scientific manner, and once the life cycle ends, it should be either incinerated through incinerators or segregated, recycled and upcycled again, so that the waste material comes back into production and goes into the manufacturing of new products and new commodities. So that way you reduce the stress on the environment, that way you promote more sustainable management of resources, and you tackle the hazardous impact of waste such as plastic waste. So today the mantra is establishing a circular economy for almost every raw material, not just for plastic but for everything else. Especially toxic hazardous substances, there is a very important need to recycle some of them, reuse and repurpose and upcycle the raw materials that we are using. So when it comes to plastic waste management, this has been a priority, a policy priority at the global level and also at the national level. But however, we have not really implemented this on the ground. If you look at how much amount of plastic is being scientifically handled, how much amount of plastic is being recycled, the numbers are extremely low. The OECD report states that just around 9% of this total plastic produced is being recycled. Out of the 350 plus million tons of plastic generated in 2019, just 9% of it was recycled. Majority of it is ending up in landfills. Almost half of the plastic waste, it is simply being dumped in these urban landfills, which is a major hazard as far as air pollution, water pollution is concerned. Around 19% of it is being incinerated. It's being burnt in incinerators, which contributes to emissions and pollution as well. 22% of it is disposed in an uncontrolled manner. The municipal bodies, the local authorities around the world are simply dumping plastic waste in some uncontrolled sites or dumps, thus aggravating the environmental problem. So by looking at these numbers, you can realize the gravity of the situation we are dealing with. 350 plus million tons of plastic, this is going to triple in the next 30 years, and we are barely recycling 9% of the plastic waste. Half of it is being dumped in landfills, 22% is just being dumped in random sites, and a small percentage is being incinerated as well, thus aggravating the problem. Correct? Now, according to the UNEP report, the UN Environment Program, which is pushing for a global plastics treaty, out of the plastic which is recycled, majority of it is recycled by the informal sector. Almost 85% of the recycling which is taking place in the world, it's being done in the informal industry, the informal garbage collectors, right, and the informal waste management industry that exists in almost every country. Majority of the recycling and the management of the waste is being done by the informal sector, by the informal workers. So that is why the writers are calling upon greater involvement of the informal sector, because they are playing a predominant role in waste management. See, today governments are implementing various principles. Like for example, India has introduced extended producer responsibility. This is a global standard when it comes to waste management. If you look at our waste management rules, the plastic waste management rules notified by the Ministry of Environment, right, we have introduced the concept of EPR, extended producer responsibility, where we try to hold the producer accountable for the entire life cycle of a certain product. For example, in the electronic waste industry as well, India has implemented the principle of EPR. If you look at the e-waste management rules, extended producer responsibility has been provided where the producer of a certain product will be held responsible, accountable for the entire life cycle of the product, from its manufacturing to sale to usage and eventual disposal. It's the producer who has to create a chain so that the circular economy can be established and the disposed products can be collected in a scientific manner, segregated and handled in a scientific manner. The idea is to promote recycling, reuse, repurposing, etc. So that some of the raw materials can be brought back. Precious raw materials, hazardous raw materials can be brought back into the production, thus promoting a more sustainable economic model. So despite implementing the EPR principle, right, producers are not really being held accountable as far as waste management is concerned. The producers have done the bare minimum when it comes to waste management, not just in India but around the world. Majority of the waste is being handled by your informal workers, by the informal waste management industry. Now this is a reality which has to be acknowledged. The UN Environment Program has acknowledged it. So that is why it is pushing countries around the world to adopt a global plastics treaty where the informal workers are also included as a stakeholder. If we have to solve the menace of plastic waste, then solution can't just come from the governments. Solution can't come from the United Nations or global organizations. The solution has to be local with the involvement of your informal waste management industry. 85% of the waste being handled, the plastic waste, is being handled by informal workers. So that is why in the ongoing negotiations for a global plastics treaty, informal workers and recovery sector, they are being considered as one of the stakeholders. The IWRS, Informal Waste and Recovery Sector, it is given representation in the ongoing negotiations for finalizing the global plastics treaty. According to UN Habitat, according to its report, the Waste-Wise Cities tool, it states that informal sector accounts for 80% of the solid waste recovery in our cities. In cities around the world, right, the municipal solid waste which is generated, which includes plastic waste as well, 80% of it is being collected by the informal workers. Right? So it clearly highlights the failure of the municipal bodies, the failure of the governments, and in general, the failure of the waste management cycle which was supposed to be implemented. So without involving the informal industry, the informal waste collectors, you can never ensure efficient management of the plastic waste, the municipal waste that we are generating. So that is why in the ongoing negotiations, which is led by UN Environment Program, the informal industry has been given adequate representation. They are part of the negotiations taking place to finalize a global plastics treaty. The UN Environment Program gave the initiative, and in 2021, a intergovernmental negotiating committee was established. All the members of UNEP, including India, are part of the INC, the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, and already 4 summits have taken place. The goal is to have a global plastics treaty by the end of this year. By 2024, there should be a global plastics treaty in place. This was the goal adopted by the UN Environment Program in 2021. Recently, the latest summit of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee took place in Montreal, in Canada. This was INC number 4. Unfortunately, due to differences between various countries, between developed and developing nations, and also amongst the large polluters like India, US, because of the differences and the different positions they were taking, a final treaty was not worked out during the recent summit in Canada. But in a few months, by the end of this year, there will be a 5th summit which will be organized in South Korea. The Seoul summit will take place in the South Korean capital. And during this 5th summit of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, it is widely anticipated that we will be successful in working out a global plastics treaty. So in the run-up to these negotiations, the writers essentially are urging the countries to provide greater representation for informal industry, to give greater role for the informal workers, and they say that India has a key responsibility here to ensure that this happens. Because India is seen as an emerging economy, a country which can provide voice to the global south, a country which can give leadership to the developing, underdeveloped nations, which are facing the enormous burden of plastic waste. In India itself, plastic waste management has become a huge challenge, even though single-use plastics have been banned. Right? Still, plastic usage, production remains extremely high, and waste management remains as haphazard as possible. So they are urging India to raise the voice of the informal workers, work with the informal industry, and use the global platform created by the UNEP to strike a solution by bringing all the countries together. By gaining the support of other developing, underdeveloped countries, India can ensure that there is greater representation for these workers in the informal sector who are playing a greater role in plastic waste management. Right? For example, there could be a global solution under the treaty where there is a greater allocation of funds to the informal industry, or an attempt to formalize the informal industry. The informal waste pickers, right, who are playing a key role in this sector, they deserve to be paid more. Their livelihood needs to be protected. They need better access to healthcare because of the hazardous nature of their work. They need better social security. So if these aspects are taken care of, informal workers are going to play a bigger role, right, in coordination with the local bodies, the municipal bodies, which is going to be critical in our fight against plastic waste pollution. So that is why the writers are very hopeful that the 5th summit, which is going to happen in South Korea, is going to give us a global plastics treaty, and they are hoping that countries like India will represent and raise the voice of the developing nations and promote the interests of the informal workers who will play a critical role in plastic waste management. So based on this, you can expect a question like this. As an instrument to end plastic pollution, the proposed global plastics treaty needs to ensure social justice and equity principles for the informal recycling worker. This question is very specific to the role of the informal worker in the plastic waste management industry. Essentially, the question is asking you to talk about what the global plastics treaty can do to protect the rights, the well-being of the informal worker who's playing such a big role in plastic waste management. How can we bring in principles of social justice and equity? How can we give a greater role for the informal workers in plastic management, and how can this be adopted as part of the global treaty which is coming up? That is what the question is asking. So in the introduction, as always, set the tone for your answer. Maybe present data regarding plastic pollution, the plastic waste challenge that we are dealing with, the extent of plastic waste as per the reports of OECD, UNEP and UN Habitat. Quote these organizations, their reports, if possible, the data, if you remember the data. If not the exact number, at least the broad trend can be indicated. You can point out that majority of the plastic waste is landing in urban landfills. Very small percentage of the plastic waste is being recycled. Right? If you remember the exact numbers, great. Even if you don't, it is still fine. You don't have to mug up and by heart. Just remember the overall trends and patterns. So point out what is the problem created by plastic waste, what's the current burden that we are dealing with, and mention how little has been done when it comes to establishing a circular economy for plastic waste. So that is your introduction. In the body, talk about the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, which has been set up by the UN Environment Program, which is currently in the process of negotiating a global plastics treaty. Talk about the priorities that countries are bringing up at the ongoing negotiations. Discuss how the recent summit failed in Canada, but there is hope for the upcoming summit in South Korea, and there is a possibility that a global plastics treaty might be adopted. So one small paragraph about the proposed global plastics treaty. Then elaborate the role of informal workers. The role being played by the informal waste management industry. You can mention that majority of the waste being recycled, it's being handled by the informal sector. Right? You can mention that most of the waste being collected in cities, the municipal solid waste, which includes plastic waste, majority of it is being collected by informal workers. But they have no livelihood security, no social security. They are exposed to hazardous substances, right, which poses health concerns as well. So there is a need to secure social justice and equity to them. and make the informal industry a greater part of plastic waste management. So that way you are justifying the role and the prominence that should be given to the informal waste management industry. Then you can conclude your answer. In the way forward, you can mention some solutions, maybe increased payments for informal workers or greater formalization of the waste management industry by securing them jobs with local urban bodies, or ensuring that there is social security, better access to healthcare for them, better incentives for them, as they are playing a critical role in plastic waste management. So offer these suggestions and solutions, and you can say that this could be included as part of the Global Plastics Treaty, which will secure the rights of informal workers. And that completes your answer. So on this note, I complete the discussion of the mains articles. Now we head towards the prelim section and take a quick look at the smaller articles in the newspaper. On the front page and also on page number 11, we have a couple of articles related to the swearing-in ceremony which is going to be held tomorrow. So according to news reports, President of India, Draupadi Murmu, has already invited Prime Minister Modi, appointed PM Modi as the designate Prime Minister for the time being, and has invited PM Modi as the leader of the single largest party to stake claim for forming the next government of India, and accordingly tomorrow the swearing-in ceremony will be held, where few Council of Ministers will also be administered the oath. So related to this, let's take up a question, a prelims question. I want you guys to answer this. Which article in the Constitution deals with the appointment of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers? I know it's a relatively simple question, but I'm assuming there will be a lot of beginners, freshers, who may not have sufficient knowledge about the basic articles in the Constitution. So please attempt this question. Let me know the answer in the comments. In which article, under which article of the Constitution, we have provisions related to the appointment of the Prime Minister, the Council of Ministers, etc. Please mention the answer in the comments. Now, I am going to discuss the article without mentioning the article number. Let's look at the key provisions contained in this article. According to this particular article, the Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President. Alright? But however, the President can't simply appoint anyone. Usually the norm is that the leader of the single largest party, in the current context, it will be the BJP, which has 240 seats based on the recent election results, and accordingly the leader, that is Narendra Modi, has been invited by the President to stake claim to form the government. So Narendra Modi is not just the leader of the single largest party, he also happens to be the leader of the coalition, the NDA, which has sufficient majority, which has almost 293 seats, which is way above the majority mark. So accordingly, the President has invited the leader of the single largest party or the single largest coalition, and the President is going to appoint the leader of that coalition as the next Prime Minister. Then the Prime Minister will recommend the Council of Ministers to be appointed. The Prime Minister will advise the President on the ministers who will be appointed, right? And accordingly, the President will appoint these Council of Ministers. So the President doesn't have much of a discretion here. Understood? Of course, if there is a hung parliament, then matters will take a different turn. Even then, it would be leader of the single largest party who's first invited to stake claim to form the government. And of course, in such case of a minority government, the President might ask the Prime Minister to prove a vote of confidence on the floor of the House. Right? So on the floor of the House, voting would take place just to establish that the government has sufficient support. But in this case, when there is a majority established either by a single party or through a coalition, the numbers are very clear. So in that case, the leader of that particular coalition or that particular party is invited, appointed as the PM, and based on the advice of the PM, Council of Ministers are appointed. So it's the Prime Minister who decides who will be the Council of Ministers. Right? The President simply appoints the Council of Ministers. Next, under the same article, there is a provision regarding the maximum number of ministers who can be part of the Council of Ministers. The total number of ministers, including the PM, it shall not exceed 15% of the total number of members of the House of the People. Out of the total members of the Lok Sabha, 15% would be the strength of the Council of Ministers. That is the maximum strength. This was added through a particular constitutional amendment. Can you find out which constitutional amendment led to the addition of this provision? Right? And let me know in the comments which was the constitutional amendment that introduced this provision. Next, if let's say the member of parliament who is being appointed as a minister has been disqualified on the grounds of defection under the provisions of the 10th schedule, then that member of parliament will not be eligible to be appointed as a minister as well. So that is also part of this particular article. The minister holds office during the pleasure of the president. But however, again, it's not the discretion of the president. President is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, which is headed by the PM. So the Council of Ministers, chaired by the PM, will advise the president, and accordingly, ministers hold office during the pleasure of the president. So essentially, president can remove one of the ministers as well, but it's not a discretionary power of the president. It's based on the advice of the prime minister, who leads the Council of Ministers. And the Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to the House of the People, which elected them. Right? They are representatives of the people at the end of the day. Right? The executive is accountable to the Lok Sabha, to the elected representatives. So Council of Ministers collectively is responsible to the House of the People. The president shall administer the oath of office, which is outlined under the 3rd schedule. So tomorrow the oath which will be administered to the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, it will be according to the oath listed under the 3rd schedule of the Constitution, and the President is going to administer the oath. Next, if a minister is appointed who is not an MP, of Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha, then within 6 months the minister has to enter the parliament, either into the Lok Sabha or into the Rajya Sabha. This is mandatory requirement, or else the minister would cease to be a minister after 6 months. So any individual can be appointed technically by the PM as a minister, as one of the Council of Ministers, but within 6 months, either they should be nominated into the Rajya Sabha, or they should get elected to the Rajya Sabha, or contest an election and get elected to the Lok Sabha, right? So they have to be a member of either House of the Parliament within 6 months of their appointment. Next, their salaries allowances is outlined under the 2nd schedule. The 2nd schedule of the Constitution provides the salaries allowances of Council of Ministers. So these are some basic pointers that you need to answer any question related to formation of a new government and swearing in ceremony. Now, one very important point which I would like to mention here is that Prime Minister Modi has used the swearing in ceremony very actively as part of India's foreign policy and international relations. In 2014, I'm sure all of you remember how PM Modi had invited the leaders of all the SAARC countries, right? So when PM Modi was sworn in 2014, the leaders of all the SAARC countries were invited to mark the launch of the Neighborhood First policy. So leaders of Pakistan, even Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and few other countries were invited to take part in the swearing in ceremony in 2014, and then the focus was on India's immediate neighborhood. South Asia was the priority focus as the Modi government was launching the Neighborhood First policy. But in 2019, the BIMSTEC countries became the focus. When the Modi government came back for a 2nd term, the focus had shifted to BIMSTEC because Pakistan had repeatedly carried out few attacks against India. Following this, tensions had increased and India had isolated Pakistan, and we had even sidelined the SAARC grouping post 2016. So India's focus was now on BIMSTEC countries, which includes few Southeast Asian countries as well, and some of the BIMSTEC leaders were invited in 2019 to be part of the swearing in ceremony. This time, for 2024, the focus is on some neighboring countries, few selected neighbors, and also the Indian Ocean region. So tomorrow, when the swearing in ceremony takes place, the leaders of Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, Nepal and Bhutan have been invited. So these are from the immediate neighborhood, who are very crucial partners for India. So Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, then the leaders of Bhutan and Nepal and Sri Lanka are going to take part. Along with them, a few leaders of Indian Ocean countries, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, they have been invited as well, which shows the shifting priorities of India. And India has been using the swearing in ceremony as an opportunity to initiate better relations with some of the countries in our neighborhood, not just in the immediate neighborhood, but also in the extended neighborhood of India. So that is how swearing in ceremonies can serve a diplomatic purpose. It can set the foreign policy agenda of the government right from day one. Right? You can show your priorities through this symbolic gesture. Next, Let's look at this article on page 1 related to Indian economy. The Monetary Policy Committee of the RBI has retained the policy rate, which is the repo rate, at 6.5%. The repo rate has remained untouched by the Monetary Policy Committee, which met yesterday, and it has retained the repo rate at 6.5%. Now, what do you mean by this? What's the significance of this? See, repo rate, it is the rate at which the RBI lends money to commercial banks in the country. Just like we borrow loans from the banks, banks borrow that money from the RBI. RBI is lending money to the banks at a certain rate, interest rate, which is nothing but the repo rate. Now, this is the primary monetary policy tool of the RBI. By altering the repo rate, by increasing or decreasing the repo rate, RBI can manage liquidity in the economy. Thus, it can control inflation or promote growth. So, for example, let's say RBI wants to induce more liquidity. RBI wants more liquidity to be in the market in order to promote growth, so that more cheaper loans can be given by the banks to investors. So if that is the approach of the RBI, the Monetary Policy Committee, then what will RBI do? It will reduce the repo. A reduction in repo will push the banks to borrow more from RBI and give the cheaper money as cheaper loans to potential investors. So that aids the objective of growth. And the opposite happens when the objective is controlling inflation. If there is excessive liquidity which is causing inflation, then one way to control the inflation is to suck out the excess liquidity. This can be easily done by the RBI by increasing the repo, because now banks will get attracted. They will get a higher interest rate. If they park the money, it's a mandatory requirement. They'll have to park that money with the RBI and earn a higher interest, and essentially credit becomes more expensive. Cheaper loans will not be available, so investors will find it difficult to borrow more funds from the banks. So in that regard, growth and inflation, they are inversely proportional. They are inversely related to each other. Promoting growth might lead to inflation, controlling inflation might compromise growth. So this is a difficult task managed by the Monetary Policy Committee. It has to strike a balance between promoting growth and controlling inflation. Alright, and the key tool which is used is the repo rate. It's the primary monetary policy tool used by the Monetary Policy Committee. So it has been retained at 6.5%, and also RBI had taken an accommodative approach towards growth. Even though there were inflation concerns, in order to promote growth in the country, it had maintained an accommodative stance. But this is being reviewed and it might be revoked very soon, which means in the coming quarters, repo rate might increase, because there are concerns about inflation as well. See, Monetary Policy Committee has a target. Its target is to maintain CPI inflation at 4%. with a range of plus or minus 2%. This is the mandate, the legal mandate of the Monetary Policy Committee. Inflation target is 4% ideally, with a range of plus or minus 2. So the total range within which inflation should be is between 2% to 6%. So maintaining inflation between this range is the task of the MPC. As of now, inflation has been quite well handled, but there were concerns and RBI had taken an accommodative stance to promote growth. Now RBI is taking a relook at this. The Monetary Policy Committee has taken a stand that it's going to withdraw the accommodative approach, and it means in the coming days we might see an increase in repo in order to control the inflation, which has been slightly spiking. Next, on page number 4, there is an article related to NOTA, none of the above option. Right, in the EVMs, I'm sure you would have seen the NOTA option which is present. So this article is providing us with an important trend, and there might be a prelims question based on this. So if you look at the total number of NOTA votes polled, and if you take a comparison with previous elections, there is a dip in the usage of NOTA nationally. In the last general election, around 1.6% of the total votes cast were NOTA votes. But in this Lok Sabha election, this has declined by 0.07%. It has declined by 0.07% to 0.99%. So across the country, there is a decline in the usage of the NOTA option. But interestingly, there is an increase in the usage of NOTA in the Northeast. Specifically in the Northeast region, the number of NOTA votes cast has seen a jump compared to around 0.71% votes in the Northeast in 2019. There is a jump to around 0.81%. Is that clear? So this indicates the trends and also in general the resentment that voters do have against all political parties and their candidates. Of course, NOTA doesn't have any real impact as such. Despite NOTA getting more votes, the next candidate who gets the largest votes would still be declared the winner. But it does have a certain impact in bringing out the resentment the voters in general have with their candidates and with the political parties. So please remember the trend. So nationally there is a dip in NOTA votes, and in the Northeast we have seen an increase. Next, on page 13, the RBI has started paying attention to the various frauds which are taking place on digital payment platforms. Right, the UPI based digital payment platforms that we have, from Google Pay, Phone Pay to other applications, there are several frauds and scams being committed by various scamsters and cyber criminals. So to tackle these threats, the RBI has proposed the establishment of an intelligence platform, the Digital Payments Intelligence Platform. The RBI has proposed this idea to bring in all the stakeholders together. It would include the payment applications, essentially the digital wallet startups and the companies, the fintech companies which provide digital payment services, along with the concerned regulatory authorities, that is RBI and other institutions like National Payment Corporation of India Limited, etc. They would all be part of this platform where they would share information, share data, and coordinate with each other to put an end to these scams and frauds that are committed through digital payment platforms. So just remember that digital payment intelligence platform, right? Digital network intelligence platform. This is proposed by the RBI. Next, there is an article related to quality control orders. The textile industry has appreciated the relaxation of these quality control orders. That is the article. So let's understand, what do you mean by quality control orders? Why is it important? What is its significance? The quality control orders, they maintain a set of standards with regard to the products that are produced in India, the products produced by our domestic manufacturers. For those products, a set of quality standards are laid down by concerned ministries and departments. The concerned ministries and departments, they lay down these quality standards, which is established by the BIS, the Bureau of Indian Standards. As per the provisions of the BIS Act, Bureau of Indian Standards Act, these quality standards are laid down and they are notified by the concerned ministries and departments for various sectors like textiles. So this helps in maintaining a quality check on the products produced domestically, and it will actually aid our exports as well. It could help produce higher quality products in India, which can find better markets as far as exports are concerned. Now, these quality control orders can become a burden for the domestic industry. They may not have the resources, the kind of funds or the technical skills to follow the higher quality standards sometimes notified by the government. So this increases the cost of production, right? So sometimes industry resists the quality control orders, but it is necessary as well to maintain quality standards and ensure that we export high quality products. So that is what the QCO means, and even at the WTO, it can't be challenged on certain grounds. The government reserves the right to set quality standards and even increase the quality standards or decrease the quality standards as per our requirement, especially on the grounds of national security, our economic strength, etc. To fulfill certain national interests, the government can vary the quality control standards without being questioned at the WTO. Next, on page 14, this small article mentions a nomadic community in Southeast Asia called the sea nomads. They are also locally known as the Bajau Laut. This group of people who lead a nomadic life in the sea, they are called Bajau Laut, and the community is found in Southeast Asia. I'm sure you would have heard about nomadic tribes which move around land. Usually nomadic tribes are pastoralist in nature. They keep moving from place to place. They maintain their herds, right? But in the sea as well, there is a nomadic community, and this community is very unique. The Bajau Laut community found in the Sulu Sea, which is located between Philippines, Indonesia and Malaysia. This is where you find this community of sea nomads called Bajau Laut. Now they are extremely unique because they have actually displayed a very unique adaptation as far as human evolution is concerned. Since they live on the sea, right, and they keep moving around the Sulu Sea regularly, their bodies have evolved as well. They are known for their incredible swimming and diving skills. They are known for having a larger spleen. The size of their spleen is much larger than average humans, and researchers believe that it's because of their seafaring capabilities. It could be possible adaptation which allows them to stay underwater for more than 10 minutes, which usually is not possible for average human. So they have some incredible diving and swimming skills, and this is seen as part of the evolution adaptation the community has gone through, and it is evident with the larger spleens that they have, the larger spleen structure. But one concern for the community is that when it comes to their nationality, there has always been a big issue regarding this. See, the Bajau Laut sea nomads are found primarily here in the Sulu Sea between Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia and Brunei. So sometimes the sea nomads, they enter the exclusive economic zones or territorial waters of these countries. They set up these temporary settlements, they engage in fishing in their waters, leading to a clash between the government authorities and the sea nomads. So in this particular instance, Malaysian authorities have destroyed the houses of these sea nomads in the Sulu Sea. So their well-being, their basic rights have always been under question because of their nomadic lifestyle, and they don't belong to any particular country as such. They inhabit the Sulu waters, and it has always been a major issue as well in this region, right? Which country should give them citizenship, which country should be responsible for their welfare, has been a matter of dispute and concern, and every now and then government authorities often target the community, leading to question of human right violations as well. Coming to the last article for today, on page 14 we have an article referring to the disputed Senkaku Diaoyu Island. Japan has lodged a protest against China over the entry of Chinese military vessels near the disputed islands. So that is the development reported over there. You should just know where these islands are located. The Senkaku Islands, also called the Diaoyu Islands. Senkaku or the Diaoyu Islands. It's a group of islands located in East China Sea, disputed between China and Japan. Both sides have historical claims over it. Right? A group of islands are controlled by China, some are controlled by Japan, and there's a standing dispute going on over here where both sides often run into a confrontation. Especially China has been very aggressive. It has even disrupted freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight by intercepting Japanese vessels and Japanese aircraft. So the entry of Chinese vessels near the disputed waters has been contested by Japan, and that's what has been reported in the article. So on this note, I would like to bring today's discussion to an end. We have completed all the 9 articles with a comprehensive analysis, and I hope you guys have understood every topic. If you guys have liked the session, do let us know through your comments, do press the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it for today. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.